Hello and welcome to today's Insight Live, the IT Experts Take. I'm Jason Rader and I will be your host today as we talk about sustainability is a journey, or as a journey maybe. With me today, we have favorites of the show. We have Juan Orlandini, our CTO. Welcome, Juan.
All right, thank you, Jason.
And we have Jeremy Nelson, Director in Services. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thank you, Jason. Great to be here again.
All of us doing this show right before we run out to the airport. So thanks everybody for arranging their schedules to be here today.
Well, it's part of our lifestyles that we've chosen. So it is what it is.
It is. And I think this is a topic worthy of a little bit of adjustment and a little bit of time away, especially, when we talk about sustainability, we're all about to jump on airplanes. And I think there's an element to the carbon footprint that we'll be contributing to. So it's great that we're having an opportunity to maybe come together and talk about maybe some more of the positive influences that we can have.
I'm going to pick up a thread on that. I don't know if you've noticed, but now when you book a flight, it actually gives you the carbon emissions for
Yes.
that flight. I've actually started using that as a yardstick to figure out which flight I want to take and which carrier I'm going to use for that flight. So
a perfect example of how that can be built into an organization to help everybody have a part in that. That's awesome.
Exactly.
I've done the exact same. I've actually paid. So it's funny that you bring that up, Juan. Like I was just going through that exact same exercise last week as I was booking a flight, and because it does show it on the app, like literally as you're booking it, it says like this is what this particular carbon cost would be for this flight. And I looked at it, and I actually paid a little bit more for a flight that was direct, right? But it had a much lower overall carbon impact. So yes, 100%.
Yep.
Win-win.
Well, I don't know about the win-win on my part.
Yeah.
I was a nonstop, so it was faster, but it did cost more. So anyway, it's a neutral.
Fair enough. So, I think that we jumped right into it right off the bat, but what we wanted to kind of start off with is, sustainability, very broad topic, and kind of honing it down to sustainability when we're talking about from a corporate perspective, and then we'll get into that journey part. But who wants to take a shot at what we're talking about when we talk about sustainability in this context?
So I'll take one if that's all right, Juan, and maybe you can kind of fill in where I maybe missed the mark a little bit. But one of the things that I read about sustainability, especially as I've dug deeper into this particular topic, is it really comes down to the continuation of environmental and human well-being. Right. It's a really, really broad stroke, right? But it's a evolution, and it's a journey of that continuous improvement of both, the impact that we have on our environment and the other people that represent our community. So that's how I've always kind of looked at ever since I read that. I'm like, oh, that's what sustainability is. And that's how we're looking to now measure success, is through that lens. And that, I don't know, that really impacted me. So that's the way that I kind of look at sustainability as a topic.
It is, and it's exactly right. So I'm not going to add anything to that. I'm just going to color it a little bit more, right? Here's the interesting thing about it is that it's really deep and far-reaching when you look at it through that lens, right? Because it's everything from corporate citizenship to manufacturing policies to recyclability to power consumption, carbon footprint, and all those other things that go into that. So this is a big, big deal, and it's going to take us a while as a planet to actually really understand what this is going to do for us as a whole and as individual businesses, and then further down as individuals, right? So it's a perfect time to get started on this because legislation's coming that's going to force it. But as a human, I want this yesterday.
I love it. Well, and I would want even one more double click into that for you there, Juan, right? I think one of the most common terms that we hear when we're talking about sustainability, it's the acronym, right? We're in IT, we love acronyms, but it's all about ESG, right? Environmental, social, and governance. And I think it kind of breaks into those three different pillars. And a lot of time gets really spent in really, I think that environmental pillar, especially with climate change and some of the things that we're addressed with and we're kind of facing head on as just a global ecosystem of people. We're really heavily focused in that environmental aspect of it, but just to ensure that there is that social aspect, and then even governance, just making sure that the corporations and the organizations that we lead are being done in an ethical way, that we're not just out there sacrificing the other two in the spirit of profit, right? Like, yes, we need to continue to drive profitable organizations that allow sustainability and drive into that social, but really just this kind of cyclical type of an approach of building a corporate ecosystem.
So I'll tell you that ESG term is now pretty familiar. This is a funny story. About 3 years ago, I sat in on an advisory council for one of our partners, and one of the leaders from that partner organization said, asked the audience, "Who here cares about ESG?" And none of us raised our hands. And then she explained what ESG was, and then she asked, "Who here cares about ESG?" And we all raised our hands because that was not a common term. So this is actually a common belief, but not a common terminology for everybody. And it's been fascinating to watch that evolve very rapidly over the last 3 years.
Yeah, I like, and it's interesting from that perspective. I think everybody cares about this thing, but cares about sustainability. And I quoted to you guys in the green room earlier that, when they surveyed 2,600 CEOs, that 98% of those CEOs said that it was core to what they felt their job role was related to. And I think that's a big deal. And that's one of those things, the G in ESG is governance. There wasn't anything that mandated that. It was, when the CEOs feel that that's part of their responsibility. And, that's responsibility from a planet perspective, personal responsibility. There's all of those, a corporate responsibility as well. That's a big deal. But I think the G, the governance, and how do we implement this? Somebody mentioned legislation earlier. Well, then we'll know exactly how to implement it. Until then, and that kind of gets a little tedious because what do we do? How do we get started? That's where a little bit of okay, I'm on board, but what do I do next kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like I think about it, Jason, in the form of ratings that we have on movies, right? Is rather than waiting for legislation to tell us, what's the best way for us to be able to provide content out to a mass of humanity and allow them to make smart decisions and allow them to consume it in a way that's responsible, right? Very, very similar in nature. But that industry governed itself. They saw that it was important. They saw that it was valuable. They wanted to be a good representative for the communities that they were a part of, and they created the rating system. And I think that's kind of similar to like what we're talking about now. We know that at some point that there will be legislation that will mandate certain levels of ESG and sustainability within organizations, and there's going to be various different financial incentives in order to be able to achieve those sustainability metrics and KPIs. But at the end of the day, I think the what you shared, the 98% of those 2,600 CEOs already feel like that is a core part of their responsibilities as the leader of these corporations. Kind of shows a little bit of that self-governing. They recognize the importance. They recognize the impact that it has, not just on them as an organization and maybe their reputation within the marketplace, but also they recognize that they are a part of this ecosystem that is humanity, and that if they don't take that responsibly, then the whole system starts to crumble and fall apart. And so it's in everyone's best interest to take it seriously and to make it important.
And it doesn't have to be big things, Jason, to get started on this. And that was one of the
Yeah.
things that you kind of asked us, where do we get started on this, right? And it could be as simple as making sure that you are starting to source from people that do care and report on these things, right? And even there, making sure that if you're producing products, that you're producing them in a way that is actually responsible, at least beginning to maybe recyclable, one of those kinds of things. Relatively straightforward, might not be easy because there's a whole bunch of supply chain logistics that need to be handled, but those are things that can be started upon immediately, right? Carbon footprint, there's all sorts of tooling that's already available, and there's actually software that you can buy today that can measure your carbon footprint and what does that mean for you, right? There's places that you can do this around the modern workplace. As we navigate this new normal of should I come into the office, not come into the office, it's actually an opportunity to rethink of how you leverage the real estate that you own and make it more green. And there's all sorts of stuff around green buildings and better air quality for the workers that are in those buildings, and power and sustainability. There's all sorts of things that are available today It's just a matter of making sure that you just find which one is the most opportune for you right now. Just get started, right, and get going. And down the road, when legislation comes, you'll have to adjust, but at least it won't be a start from scratch.
And
Yeah.
let's face it, we're in IT, so I'd be remiss if I didn't call out like all of this centers around data, right? Like you can't take action unless you can actually understand the data and understand where you can have the biggest impact for maybe the least amount of investment, right? Like where can you make smart small investments now in order to create longer term ESG payouts, right? And so I think it all comes back to a lot of what we talk about as we talk about the emergence of AI and automation, all these different things. They all center around one common theme, and that is data. And so leveraging various different sensors and data collection platforms in order to be able to understand what some of those metrics are. Like, first, just educating yourself on what really is your environmental impact. And then how do you collect the data to then associated with that? How do you create KPIs on how to improve? And then finding ways to collect that data on a regular basis and being able to track the impacts of the decisions and changes that you're making on the overall ESG quality of your organization against your KPIs. Data,
I,
data, data.
and I think that's, as being a consultant for most of my career, there was always this kind of axiom that I made up, but it was like anything you pay attention to, you usually get 30% better at. That was just my kind of standard rule. It's not Moore's law or anything, but it was one of those things that when people start to pay attention, they get better at it, right? And I think, we talked about the journey. This isn't something you're going to be able to work out on Friday over lunch. This is something that's going to take a decade potentially for some organizations, maybe longer. But I think that paying attention to those things as you acquire new capabilities, new tools, new partners, all of those things, you can make the right choices. I mean, in our new facility that is fantastic, they paid a huge amount of attention to the sustainability of that facility, and it's impressive. So that was one of those things that, paying attention on the front end and leveraging those opportunities to capitalize when it's appropriate can really pay off. And again, just paying attention and having some level of governance and understanding on how we should do those and make those decisions as we move forward.
Yeah, I'll tell
Yeah.
you. Sorry, Jeremy.
No, go for it.
Using us as client zero is always a good example. And what you're talking about is our new global headquarters that we opened up a couple of years ago. And we really did an amazing job. There was a whole team that really focused on that. But we also work with some very big customers. I mean, the biggest of the bigs or partners. And I recently had an opportunity to go tour a manufacturing facility from Intel, one of their fabs, which is right around the corner from our headquarters. And Pat Gelsinger there said, "Hey, it's going to take us 15 years to get to our ESG goals, but we're committed." And through that tour that we did of that facility, oh my God, was there a lot of investment in that, because they recycle like 98% of the water. They manufacture their own molecules on premises so that they can actually use them during the manufacturing process. There's all these amazing things that are being done, but it's been a deliberate effort to make sure that they do this moving into the future. But it is a horizon that's measured in the decades, not in the months that we're normally used to dealing with.
Yep. I think a great call out there, Juan, is again coming back to it doesn't have to be a big bang. It's not like you have to go and do all of it right now, right? Like you can't eat the elephant in one bite, or you have to take small bites to eventually kind of get through it. And Jason, one thing that I love to kind of tag in off of what you said is just having the awareness and having it influence the decision making that you are already going through, right? Like you're already doing some of these things. How do you just factor in sustainability into that decision making process? So, like, Juan, you talked about this a little bit earlier. As we look at organizations that are going through, and we know that tech debt is a significant challenge that a lot of organizations are dealing with after coming out of the large, transitioning into 100% work from home to a more longer term hybrid type of approach. And there's a significant amount of tech debt that's having to be overcome in order to be able to support operations. That tech debt is requiring the purchase of more equipment. I think it's similar to the decision making that we did when we're talking about picking specific flights. looking at the different manufacturers, looking at the various different platforms, and just factoring in sustainability into that selection process. And I know that, coming from our seat in the world, where we actually get to work with a variety of different organizations who are going through that journey and participating in different RFPs and types of scoping and architectural conversations, that is now starting to find its way into that decision making process, where they are looking for us as a partner to help them on that journey, to be able to provide them with some guidance and data along the lines of what is the impact of this. Like, so the architecture that you're proposing, yes, it meets these technical requirements and business outcomes, but what does it mean from a sustainability standpoint? Are you actually going to make our sustainability worse? Yes, you might overperform on these particular technology metrics, but does it make our world worse? Right. And so, maybe they're willing to sacrifice a little bit in certain areas in order to provide a much more positive outcome on the sustainability line.
So I'm going to say it a little bit more explicitly than you did.
Yes,
Jared.
sir.
I'm going to say for the audience, include ESG in your RFP.
Yeah.
Right.
100%.
Include ESG even if you're not doing RFPs, and if you're doing strategic purchases through a partner, whether it's through somebody like us or directly from an OEM. Make sure that we're sharing what is available, and sometimes the data is just not there yet. Right. But ask for it and start making that a common thing, so that you can actually start learning yourself, number one, and then start to differentiating between the manufacturers that are investing into the future, like we talked about.
That's great. When you said you were going to be more explicit, I was really worried. I'm glad that's what you said. I've hung out with you too many times, Juan.
There's no beer in our hands, so that you knew it was going to be clean.
Oh, but we actually got a question. Look along the bottom there.
Hey, and it says, and when we think of data, we have to include data security. Chef's kiss to whoever said that out there. We absolutely do want to think of security related to these things. Actually, before our producers maybe hit me backstage, they phenomenally do all of these surveys and things for us and make us, do a lot behind the scenes to make us look cool. We did a survey, we were curious, so we surveyed and asked, at your organization, do you have a focus group that is actively setting and driving towards sustainability? And what do you think those results were? Did you guys see this already?
I did not. I'm deeply interested in hearing the answer.
So 53% said yes. So that's
you faded out. What was the percentage?
53% said yes.
Wow.
40% said no, and 7% said I don't think so. So we'll make that a no probably. But it's pretty much split half and half, which is funny because when I went to the EPA's site to check it out, and of the Fortune 500, they said just over 50% are participating in some type of sustainability measure, have something actively going on. So that's pretty good from a survey perspective to have very, very similar results. But that's interesting. That also means there's a lot of opportunity for folks, to Jeremy's earlier point and mine, to start maybe paying attention and getting some focus around this, because it could be little things. I mean, I think when we break all of this down, this is about, saving the planet. It's about, making things better. There's also some stats that we've seen where it makes companies more profitable and more productive. So, I mean, this is complete win-win, but it's a worthy effort. I mean, there's lots of other things that I've done in my business, in my career, that I, didn't have the same kind of impact to the planet that these things had. And I think it's a worthy effort to kind of go down. And it's not an effort that you can just read that cool article while you're on the treadmill in the morning and be an expert at it later in the day. It's something that takes a lot of effort. So it's again, that journey is the first part of that journey is discovery.
I agree 100%. But you know what? I was going to comment on those numbers. We intentionally only covered North America in that survey. I'd be willing to bet you that if we did that same survey in EMEA, where legislation is already in effect, the number would be significantly higher, closer to in the 90-ish, if not higher percent, right? So that's just an indicator that if you're just a North American-based organization, it's coming. So get ready for it, right? But if you're a global organization, whatever your EMEA groups are doing, you probably want to adopt that in the rest of the world. and here in North America.
Agreed. So one thing I do want to say to the folks out there that are watching us live right now, and anybody who sees this, we care what you think the next step for this conversation should be, because we do want to do a follow-up on this. And you guys get to influence, how we talk about this, because we really want to deliver back, the value back to you guys. So please comment on this on LinkedIn or on YouTube or wherever this happens to be. But we really appreciate you guys giving us the direction that, because we can bring a lot of value, but we just want to hone those things down into where everybody out there thinks that they want to hear.
Great. You know what? I'll actually take your offer on that one real quick. And it's something that we talked about during the pre-show in the green room. Is how do you work with a partner ecosystem, the OEM ecosystem, to start on this journey as well? And one of the things that you should be doing is, as we mentioned, is asking them for that stuff, but don't take glib universal answers, because we know, all right, that these larger OEMs are made up of lots of different divisions that are in different parts of the journey. So lots of OEMs make servers and laptops, or they make cloud and this, or whatever it is, right? And make sure that you're asking the question of the portion of the business that you're doing business with, because that's going to be hugely important. And you might actually get a different answer for one versus the other if you probe deeply. So just a little piece of advice, and it'll probably help you a long way in your journey.
Great advice.
And plus, it's folks like us that can kind of help people get to the, when they're doing you remember the bake-offs, from a product capability perspective, we can help with the bake-offs from a sustainability perspective, I would assume, as well.
Well, we're building up a library of all of that, and we're being deliberate in participating in the advisory boards that all of these partners have instituted, because they're also learning. I mean, let's be real. They're just another company just like we are, right? And when we hold them to a higher standard sometimes, but we really shouldn't, they're just another company. Right. And it's interesting because sometimes they're a supplier and sometimes they're a consumer of ours. So it goes both ways. Right. But we're being very deliberate about us sitting in on these advisory boards so that we can learn, provide our learnings from the audience that we have here to those organizations, but also take what they have instituted in the directions they've handed back down so that we can create a channel of communications across the different portions of our industries.
So what would be our advice to folks that are starting the journey?
I think number one is, if I can be honest with you, Jason, just start. Just recognize that it's something that's important to you, and start to look at, I think the best thing is just identify what are your measures, right? So you talked about going to the EPA site, and there's a whole list of measures that kind of fall underneath this ESG sustainability kind of category. And not all of them are going to pertain to everybody. So the best thing to do is to go through, understand that commit that it's important to you, and then go and understand what are the different measures of sustainability, and then try and narrow them down to where is it that my organization or my area of influence potentially can have an impact on this, and then setting out a goal to start collecting data to understand like what is your overall impact, because you really can't have a big, you really can't necessarily have any type of influence change without actually having a target, right? Like understanding, if I make this change, will it actually do anything, right? So being able to collect the data, understand what your existing impact is, and then start setting goals for how you want to improve those. I think that's the first thing, is recognizing it's a journey, commit that it's important, collect the data, and then set goals.
Yeah, those are steps 1, 2, and 3, and those are fantastic, Jeremy. I think there's a step 0 that I would recommend that you do, which is to go learn and read about all of this stuff, because it is so wide and so big and so encompassing that it would be easy to get overwhelmed if you just started down one path without understanding how all of the different pieces get connected with each other. And you don't have to have a PhD in environmental studies. You don't have to have a PSG in governance. but you do need to have, a passing understanding how all these things interlock and connect with each other, so that as you start focusing on the things that you can impact, you do understand the larger scope. So that would be step zero for me, is just learn. And there's
Yep.
a wealth of resources that are out there for all of this.
Yep,
I love
that's a
it.
good one. And maybe I would even go more towards the 12-step program approach, right? Like step one is just admitting that you have a problem. So admit that you have a problem, do your research, right? Don't get overwhelmed, and then you kind of get further down that journey.
And all I would add is, we've got individual contributors who watch, we've got, executives that watch. I would say there's a 96% chance that your CEO cares about this as well and find some alignment there. And I'll grab that question in just a second. And also, I would say that everything helps. So even individuals and small, medium-sized businesses can make an impact here as well. So don't think that just because you're not some multi-billion-dollar global organization that you can't have an impact here, because you can. It says, thanks, John, for the comment. It says, can you speak a little more about overcoming transformation, leadership obstacles, and change management, specifically as it comes to the possible value benefit of including ESG in the conversation? I kind of caught a little bit of that in what I was saying about your CEO is probably on board, but how would we kind of approach this, guys? I think, Jeremy, your data, gather some data. It's hard to argue with data when it's presented to the organization. Any other comments related to this, guys?
The only other one that I would throw out there, John, and great question, right, is we talk very much about a structure where it is the topmost leadership within our organizations who already see the value of this and are actually driving it as part of like the G component of ESG. But there are going to be some organizations where that's not necessarily the case. And I think really the best way to try and get senior leaders to kind of understand that and to drive change, right, through those obstacles is that at the end of the day, a lot of these changes, especially around sustainability, are actually more cost effective and drive greater profitability to the organization. So when we think about, some of the later, like newer technology platforms, they consume less power, they take up less space. So you're now talking about shrinking the overall footprint that you need from an environmental control, like in your data centers. So it's an ability to shrink, and it reduces overall operating expense and cost. So that, I don't care who you are, however you feel about sustainability as a senior leader, I know that that's a metric that everybody cares about. And so that's usually that initial entry point to get people to start thinking about and taking sustainability seriously, because it can have a net benefit on your operating costs and obviously your ultimate profitability as an organization.
So, Jeremy, what you talked about is the two things that CEOs care about, right? Is making money or saving money, is the way I like to
Mhm.
put it, right? That's when at the end of the day, that's the two things you care about, right? And you covered very well the saving the money, because that's exactly what these savings would come from, and reduce footprint and all that. But there's also the making money out of it. And I would tell you that if you're in the sales side or product development side of the house, start measuring how you are doing against your peer groups and your competition that might be ahead of you in the journey, because it is going to be a yardstick that you're going to get measured against. And if you're starting to lose because they have a better sustainability story or messaging or true product, then you can probably get investment, because you're not going to be making as much money if you're being out competed. So it's a great way for you to go and have that conversation as well.
And ESG in the RFP.
Yep.
There you go. Bring it full circle. We're already talking about cyclical supply chain. We just brought it full circle.
Well, and I also think from John's question, there's that transformation in the organization as well, which we deal with quite a bit. This is something that's, it's got to be an initiative. It's got to be one of the table stakes for what the organization wants as they go forward. And then it becomes, that, because the transformation typically is a cultural change as well. And how much, that's the inertia that you want to go with if the organization is in a transformation as well. So I think that's another opportunity. Never, from a strategy perspective, always go with the inertia. And I think that's a perfect kind of thing. Again, alignment with the CEO. They probably care about this. The leadership does. To Juan's point, you can make money if you do this properly. And I think it's a good cultural change because, again, it can go all the way down to the individual teammates of how they can contribute when they're selecting their flights, when they're choosing to partner or work with specific organizations. It can have a big impact.
I mean, think about how simple it would be. Like, we as an organization, we use an automated system for, booking travel and things of that nature. And we already have a set of selection criteria and metrics that will bubble certain things to the top. Like, this would be your preferred carrier. This would be your preferred flight. This would be your preferred hotel. It would not be a huge stretch, especially as these organizations are now starting to publish what their overall environmental impact data is associated with that particular reservation, to be able to key off of that and be like, as an organization, sustainability is important to us. This is your most preferred flight based off of carbon emissions. This is your most preferred hotel stay based off of these environmental measures that this chain has kind of put into in force. So it's there's almost zero cost to something like that. You're leveraging the data and what's already being published, but it's a way of kind of maximizing that impact that you have in a positive way.
Fantastic. Well, guys, thanks for the conversation. And thanks to everybody out there that was contributing. We really appreciate that. It makes it a lot more fun for us. Any last words, Juan, Jeremy?
I'll throw it out there. Jeremy's point about data, and yours, Jason, about making sure that you do something about the data and pay attention to it. That's it. That is the biggest thing, is start gathering the data, start focusing on the data, educate yourself on this to make sure that you understand what the data is telling you, and then go take action. That's the best way you can get started on this.
Yep. I couldn't say it any better. And I would almost go back to like the step one of the program, admit that you have a problem, but chances are, if you've tuned into this, you're already invested in sustainability. You already see the value in ESG. So hopefully take some of the things that we've talked about today, and if you have those obstacles and those barriers, carry those forward, and let's look for ways that we can influence those around us to really take sustainability to heart and make it a priority for all of our organizations. Because at the end of the day, it's all about the continuation of environmental and human quality of life.
Well said. Thanks, gentlemen. It has been a fun time. If you folks out there want to know more about what we do at Insight, please visit us at insight.com/solutions. And thanks for joining us. See you next time.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everybody.